people make, which are not observable, and they are based upon one observing life and having a particular philosophy regarding life and existence, and they make a fundamental, it's an axiom for them, it's an assumption, and they begin with that assumption, and the fact is we all have an assumption.
Yeah. Well, Jack, I'm not entirely comfortable with that, and let me just say that I was brought up with a Christian indoctrination. I know you don't like that word, and I left it, but I'm sorry, I just don't see it, and I have to say that all of your arguments, to me, appear to be a cop-out.
Okay.
Seriously, I'm not raising my voice, I'm being quite polite. A cop-out from actually providing any evidence, and you're basically, so far as I understand it, is an acceptance that you do not have any evidence.
Okay,
but
your
you
DPR,
just think that as a
DPR,
some sort of brain set,
DPR,
some people should accept.
DPR, you win. I have no evidence. DPR, you win.
Yeah, I know that.
You win.
We all know that.
DPR, you win. You won.
Yeah.
You won.
Well, it's not a matter. It's not a
Oh
matter.
no! But it was though. It has been, because you once again continually go back to the use of the word evidence. So despite the fact that I beat my head trying to explain to you how it is that you even have beliefs of which are not based upon reason, not based upon evidence primarily, but based upon your use of reason. Yet you want me, with reference to my belief in God, to have a particular sort of evidence that you would consider to be evidence, instead of just accepting the fact that my belief in God is based upon my use of reason. You have a problem.
I accept. Do
you accept?
It must be based on your use of reason.
Okay. You accept that.
I would question your use of reason, and I think it's defective if you do reach that conclusion. And I also still maintain the position that I adopted before, which is that you should not try to impose
which is not based
those
on
views
evidence.
Without evidence.
Right,
and I can justify that.
Yeah, and you can justify.
Laci wanted to say something.
Yeah, but your assertion there was not based on evidence. But it's okay for you to make assertions not based upon evidence. But when I make an assertion not based upon the evidence you're looking for, all of a sudden, now I'm avoiding something. You're so inconsistent. This is why atheism, to me, when I encounter so many atheists, the ignorance of philosophy is so profound. Fortunately, there's a lot of people that are not like that. But it's just really, I mean, it's beyond belief that you can't see the inconsistency of what's going on, where you'll make an assertion that you justify using reason, but then you'll harp on me for making an assertion that I believe in God based upon my use of reason, but then you'll say, but Jack, give me evidence. Whereas when you made yours, I wasn't like, okay, give me your evidence. Oh, you don't have evidence? Oh, well, that's indoctrination then. But when it comes to me,
define what assertion I'm making.
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm not. If someone, Corey,
okay.
Go ahead.
Word?
Yeah, of course, Laci, go ahead.
Okay, so there's a couple of things I want to say. First off, it sounds like we're going back toward the burden of proof thing, and just for example, okay, so I study law, right? And when we're doing these mock cases, there's something called the burden of proof, and the burden of proof lays on the person who makes the claim, who makes the assertion. You stole my bike, so now you need to prove it.
Okay, so Laci, if DPR makes the assertion, Jack, you teaching children a belief that is not based upon what I consider to be evidence is indoctrination. So the burden of proof is on him?
For that statement, yes.
Okay. Now
I will justify
now question. Now, with reference to his burden of proof, should his burden of proof be based upon his use of reason primarily or his use of evidence?
Use of evidence.
Okay, what if...
And the reason for that is because I still don't understand what you mean by reason. And that could be my shortcoming, but there just hasn't been a clear... Because when you described reason, it sounded like evidence. it sounded like you were referring to the process where we evaluate evidence. So reason is the process, whereas evidence is the actual fact. That was my understanding of it. So there's this burden of proof thing that's going on. And as far as when it comes to whether or not God exists, the burden of proof, because it is a positive claim, you have to prove that that is correct. Because otherwise...
And I disagree with you a little bit here, because your approach is, to me, the burden of proof depends on who's making the assertions in terms of who's trying to convince the other person. In other words, in this conversation, I haven't been trying to convince DPR of the existence of God. Rather, DPR...
I'm sorry, Jack. What you have been trying to do is to seek to justify, I think...
seek to justify my belief.
Expressly that the teaching of children, for which there is no evidence, is justified based on some rationalization that you have managed to conjure up in your mind, for which you accept there is no evidence.
Okay, so
that's
Laci,
my issue.
So in this conversation, then, the burden of proof falls on DPR, because he's making a positive assertion. That is to say, I should not teach something to children of which I don't have the sort of evidence that he's looking for. Mm-hmm. So the burden of proof then is in his territory, right? I mean, because I'm not the... He's making the positive assertion there.
DPR is making a positive assertion.
Right.
You, Jack, should not, this is DPR saying this, not me, you, Jack, should not be spreading beliefs for which you have not evaluated with objective evidence.
Right.
That is DPR's claim. Is that right, DPR?
That's right. And an assertion is not the same as evidence. And Jack seems to be asking for evidence to justify my assertion. My assertion is not based on evidence, nor can it be. It's based on what I think is right.
Okay. And what I think is right, okay.
That's a little bit murky, because if I were to say that to Jack, I would say, well, I do need to provide justification for that assertion.
I can provide justification, Laci.
Well, I'm not saying you don't. I'm just saying that if someone's going, no matter what, I'm not talking to DPR, I'm not talking about to Jack, I'm just talking in general, positive claims require evidence.
A justification. I would
say justification which we justify with objective evidence.
In part.
So whether we're talking about if God exists, or if we're talking about what beliefs should be propagated to a crowd of people, those are both positive assertions, and in order for us to evaluate them, there needs to be evidence for it. I think that's what
I partially, yes, I partially agree. I mean, when you use the word objective evidence, I think it gets a little bit more murky too for me. But
but because and that's why
I mean, we're not in the court of law, right? I mean, in the arena.
Not in the court of law, but there is a reason that we use objective evidence in the court of law, and that's because subjective evidence is it's unreliable. It's open to a number of corruptions. Not to say that objective evidence isn't either. Of course, objective evidence is open to corruption as well. However, it is significantly less likely to be polluted because it's using a systematic deduction. It's not just sort of whatever we think should be, whatever we think is right, we're just going to pull it out of thin air and assert that. There is some system in place to make sure we're all in the same arena.
Now, Laci, you agree, though, that this is an axiom for you. That is to say, it's an assumption that is not actually justified by evidence itself.
Okay, well, I think that it could be justified, but, I will go with that. Because I think that even if there isn't, if you don't think that there is a justification for that, which there is, I think
but not an objective evidentiary.
Say that again?
I mean, but not an objective evidentiary sort of justification.
Right. Well...
It's a philosophical justification.
I think that objectivity can be objectively justified. Because here's the thing, when we're human beings and we're all up in our minds, and we're looking at the world and we're on this planet and we're trying to make sense of the world, in order to move forward in the way that we have moved forward, the only thing that has moved us forward is the fact that we have a system of deduction that is open to being falsified. You know, you can prove it wrong. We can consistently modify our beliefs by assessing them according to some system of rules.
Which is assumed. I mean, we begin with assumptions, a philosophical assumption.
Absolutely, Jack. And I understand your critique that is in itself an assumption, and I'm willing to admit to that, even though I think that it can be justified for a number of reasons.
Right. You have reasons. You have reasons for your assumption, but the reasons for your assumption are not actually based upon objective evidence. They're based upon your use of philosophy.
Well, not exactly, because using objective evidence has been it has proven itself with its use, because when we use objective evidence, we have been propelled forward. So objective evidence is the reason why you and I can sit here on opposite sides of the country. Oh no, you're in Idaho. Why we can sit, you know, in in different places in the world and talk to each other. Objective evidence is the reason why, you know, we can cure a number of illnesses now, and it's the way that we're assessing all of these other cancers and illnesses that we're trying to cure. We have to have a system to evaluate, and that's what objective evidence is. It's looking at the world and making sense of what we see and what's actually occurring.
And I understand that. Yeah, exactly. We do. I mean, Veritas et Liberatus is bringing up there, and I appreciate, Laci, your candidness. I mean, because I think that someone who studies philosophy, we all understand fundamentally there is assumptions we make of which are not grounded in the particular sort of evidence that we use as a means to go about justifying the beliefs that we have. We don't use.
Can you give me an example of